Morning. Welcome along, everybody, to September's Webinar Wednesday. Get the right month, that would help.
I thought you were going to say welcome to Citizen Fest there, Bobby.
Oh, we've done that already. We'll do it again.
That was a different time, wasn't it?
Yeah. Not today. So I'm Pauline from In Control Scotland and joined by Keith.
Hello, everyone.
And we are going to have a conversation today about some of the issues around social care recruitment, because I think this is a huge issue for so many people at the moment, that there is a bit of a crisis when it comes to social care recruitment and retention. And we really wanted to speak to an interesting bunch of people to find out some of the things that people are doing differently to try and tackle this, because it feels like it's all doom and gloom, doesn't it, Keith? It's just, it feels really tough for people. So we're interested in trying to tell a different side of the story, I suppose, for some of the interesting stuff that people are doing.
Yeah, just trying to look at acknowledging the doom and gloom and the real difficulties and challenges, but also trying to think about any ideas and ways forward that people have found or have experienced of making things a bit better there. Yeah,
so that'll be good. So before we kick off with that, we'll do a wee quickie update on what we've been up to. What have we been up to, Keith? We've got a new programme coming out soon for the lunchtime sessions for children and families, don't we? You want to say a wee bit about that?
Yeah. So we've got a programme that's going to take us through from the end of September through to the end of March, really, to the end of this current financial year. So still sticking with the lunchtime sessions on the last Thursday of the month. But with a program, hopefully, that people will be able to see and decide which ones they're coming to and what they're particularly interested in talking about over the next 6 months.
Yeah, and those are open to anybody working in or using self-directed support for children and families. And you're all welcome. Come to any or all of them. If you want to get on board with them, they hold them on Microsoft Teams. So pop a wee email over to our info@in-controlscotland.org.uk email address, and June will send you a link.
Yep. And really open to anyone who's got an interest in that. So we're keen to engage people who've got lots of experience, people who've got little experience, but just really an interest in making self-directed support and directing your own support work for children and families and people.
Yeah. And then our other set of lunchtime sessions, on the second Tuesday of the month is a more general session around SDS. Fantastic resident hosts, Keith and Holly. Thanks, Jude. We on our Tuesday lunchtime session, a more general self-directed support chat, and that's open to anybody and everybody as well. But we are going to follow on today's discussion into that space to have a bit more in-depth, bit more interactive chat. Hear some ideas that people attending have got as well about how to tackle this big issue around social care recruitment and retention. So that should be a good chat. Come along.
Yeah. And I'm just going to remind people that today's live broad stream, everybody's watching on Facebook at the moment, but you can watch it on YouTube as well, live, and you can watch it back on Facebook or YouTube if you think, I want to just listen to that bit again. Because it stays up there.
Yeah. And before our guests join us, there's one other thing that would be great to tell people about, just in case you haven't heard it. But In Control Scotland are holding our AGM on the Friday, the 7th of October at 11 o'clock. And we're holding it online this year, again, just to try and make things as accessible as possible. And anybody is welcome to come along and hear what we've been up to over the last year. We're going to have a couple of wee workshops and discussion sessions at it as well. So please do come along if you're interested. And again, as always, pop us a wee email over if you'd like to get the link to that. So it's info@in-controlscotland.org.uk, and come along.
Just putting that one up because June's given us that bit of that. Yeah, and I think one of those sessions is going to be around the New Roots homework, isn't it, Pauline? And obviously since last month we've had the TV programme about that as well. So obviously that's generated quite a lot of interest and concern and lots of people wanting to do something different. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think the BBC Disclosure Locked in the Hospital show really highlighted the very pressing situations that so many families across Scotland, and it's a couple of hundred people that are in psychiatric hospitals who are autistic or have learning disabilities. So New Routes Home meets every 6 weeks to bring together people with experience of this, people with experience on working to try and get people out of hospitals and into the community. And we try and look at practical steps that we can take to try and tackle this issue. And one of the things that we've done very recently, as in yesterday, is submit a response to the Scottish Government's mental health and wellbeing strategy, just to kind of highlight the needs of this group of people and make sure they're not forgotten about in broader mental health and wellbeing strategy in Scotland. So we'll be putting that response up on our website today to share with people, but please do go and have a look. Our website's been a wee bit updated recently as well. June's been squirreling away in the background to try and make it look a bit brighter and a bit more up to date. So go and have a wee look at our website if you've not been on it for a while, and you can see what we've been up to.
Sounds good. And we're all preparing for the first sessions of our Working Together for Change program later this month as well, aren't we? So the end of the month we're back out there again, which is lovely to do. Back out actually meeting people again, and beginning this year's Working Together for Change program. So
yep, in the real world, it'll be great.
Yeah. Okay, shall we bring our guests on, Pauline?
Yeah, let's.
We've got Donald and Alison. We haven't actually got Caroline at the moment. So if Caroline may be having a problem joining us, if not, we'll bring her in as soon as she does get here. If not, we'll have a conversation anyway with Donald and Alison. Okay.
Thank you very much. So as if by magic, there we are. So don't have your I'm going to say we don't have your rename boxes, but there we do. Thank you very much, Donald and Alison. Welcome along. Thanks so much for being part of this chat today. Is it worthwhile? Can we just do a dead quick reintroduction? Alison, can I start with you?
Yep, I'm Alison Christie. I work for the Coalition of Care and Support Providers in Scotland, and we're a membership organisation for not-for-profit providers of social care. My remit is workforce, so recruitment and retention has been a big part of my work. Unfortunately, over the last 5 years, our recruitment crisis isn't new. I think what is new is the fact that it's been recognised as a crisis. I think previous to this year, we were talking about the challenges of recruitment and retention, but we're very much talking about a crisis.
Yeah, thanks, Alison. And Donald, for the intro.
Hi there, and thanks for having me. My name's Donald MacLeod. I'm Chief Executive of Self-Directed Sport Scotland. I'm also co-chair of the Personal Assistant Programme Board, I suppose. So I'm here to represent that perspective this morning and talk about the issues we've had, not just around recruitment, but about raising the profile in general of personal assistants. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Donald. And it's dead important that we think about social care workforce being that whole broad range, including personal assistants, commission services, independent providers as well. So great to have that representation. So
I mean, I hope you don't mind me saying this, Donald, but when you've been around 100 years, it's really strange because I was just, what you said there just made me think that I was involved in your recruitment into the social care workforce like many years ago in one of your first jobs, wasn't it? Probably doing that sort of thing.
I think it was. I think Anne-Marie Monaghan gave me my first job. You gave me my second. We're still going right behind. And gone are the days where you get 100 applications and you answer 20 people. So.
Yeah.
Actually, one of my first jobs, 110 people applied for it.
Yeah.
Absolutely wild. Anyway, change times.
Yes.
So, and on that, I suppose it would be worthwhile just taking a wee bit of time to kind of recognise the current situation and have a conversation about what we really think that when we say a crisis, what do we mean by that? What does that actually look like? Alison, could I start with you? Can you tell us from CCPS provider perspective, what do you think the crisis is?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that is really missing from all of this is robust evidence base. And at CCPS, every year we carry out an annual benchmarking survey, and it's all a workforce survey. It's a really big piece of work. And what we found in our most recent survey, which the information was from December last year and the report was published in April, is that we've got a turnover of about 20% and vacancies in anything between 10 and 30%. And what that actually means in reality, what we're hearing from our members, what that actually means in reality, you've got some services that are starting every single week with a 45% gap in their rota. You know, they're just unable to cover. So when we talk about the crisis, we always talk about recruitment and retention. And some of our members tell us if we could nail retention, we could go back to recruitment being difficult, but not at crisis levels. So when we think about our evidence base, we always think about our vacancy rate and our turnover. But as you can imagine, if you're running a service every single month with a 45% deficit, the impact that that has on the well-being of your workforce, the impact that has on the people that you support, and the impact and the stress that puts on managers trying to cover all of those shifts. And I think what's really important when we talk about our evidence base is that we combine the data with stories, with here's the figures, but actually here's the impact of those figures on real people. And I think that when it comes to retention, we talk about, you know, recruitment is just filling a leaky bucket. And this was first mentioned, this phrase was first coined at the first benchmarking report launch that I was at, which will be 6 years ago now. And we haven't really improved on that. I think we can still use that phrase that we're trying to fill a leaky bucket.
Can I just ask a quick question? I know we're going to go, but how does the most recent benchmarking information and report that you've got there, Alison, how does it match with that first one that you did 6 years ago? Do those figures look much worse? Do they look a little bit worse? Do they?
Do you know, they're worse. But they're probably the recruitment difficulties aren't significantly more difficult. It's the retention issue that's really driving the recruitment crisis.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Alison. Donald, what do you think from a PA employer's kind of perspective? What are the biggest challenges, or what's the big crisis coming from?
Similar to what Alison said, that, you know, the data that we've got is so we're starting from square one, really. We don't have that information. Well, we're starting to get there now. PA recruitment's definitely a challenge. Independent support, critically underfunded. The organisations that have been established to support Option 1 arrangements have got really very little capacity to do anything out with what they currently do. When we set up the Personal Assistant Programme Board, it was on the back of a short life working group to administer the £500 thank you COVID payment to personal assistants. And that proved so challenging, but there was certain willingness from everybody to help out. But the independent support organisations, of the two big ones, one was going to take 7 months to administer and one was going to take a year. We set up a portal and made it led by the personal assistants. And long story short, we ended up reaching 5,000 personal assistants through that process. And that was our starting point. Derek Feely, in the Independent Review of Adult Social Care, highlighted the need for greater equity in terms of terms and conditions with social care workforce. So we established that programme board with Scottish Government then to address this. At that point, it was an unknown workforce. It's unregistered, and ongoing discussions around that. What we have done since is we've done the first annual PA survey, and with 917 respondents. So that's given us some great information around demographics and so on. And I know we don't want to start off a negative perspective, but there is a lack of equal application of the STS options, a lack of geographical consistency, of accountability, and a wide variation in salaries. We found that PAs were paid between £8 an hour and £19 an hour. 8 out of 10 hadn't had training in the past year. No peer support or very little peer support on career pathway. So there's a whole system issue here.
Just Donald, what is the size of from the information that you've been gathering like that? What is the size of the PA workforce in Scotland?
Well, at the moment, we've 5,000 is what we've come across, but that's PAs of adults. We don't know what the size of the workforce working with children is. So we suspect that proportionally, there's more data in England, so we suspect it's around 8,000 in total.
Yeah, significant size. So you've mentioned there, Donald, a few, and Alison as well, some of the big kind of drivers for this challenge, I suppose, are some of them are very obvious. They are about people feeling underpaid and undervalued, maybe lack of training opportunities or progression, maybe for people seeing it as a viable career option as well. Are there what other drivers do you think there are for this? Like why now? Why is it so bad now rather than it was bad 6 years ago, but what's made it worse? What do you think, Alison, on that actually?
I think there's a couple of reasons. COVID obviously being one of them, and the pressures that put on the workforce and the impact that that's having on people's well-being. So I think that what we've seen at the beginning of the pandemic was an increase in interest in coming to work in social care because the press was really good, the narrative was really positive. And then as that changed, people lost interest, so the numbers dipped again. So I think stress, burnout, well-being are hugely significant. But the other thing that certainly for the third sector, what's really significant is the value that's placed on this workforce. And Donald talked about parity. And not only do we not have parity with health services, but third and private sector workers of social care don't even have parity with their local authority counterparts. And we also, CCPS members deliver children's services as well. And what we're hearing for the first time ever, because everything that's happened throughout and since COVID has been aimed at the adult social care workforce. And what we're hearing is that very stable workforces and children's services, they're beginning to see some of the issues that we've had for a long time within adult services. So I think stress, burnout, well-being and parity are two big drivers of this.
Yeah, when you were talking before, Alison, you were talking about the leaky bucket. I suppose one of the things that I was trying to think of that metaphor a little bit, and what you were saying was that the actual what's going in the bucket hasn't changed that much, but what's happened is that the holes have got bigger in the bucket for some of the reasons that you've said there. And then I was also thinking about inequality, because inequality is obviously, I mean, if you look at the world generally anyway, inequality is obviously going to be and always will be one of the biggest drivers for dissatisfaction in a workforce, in a community, in a society. So it's that inequality and the perceived inequality that it feels like is from what you said there is driving a lot of that move, a lot of that churn, a lot of that people moving on from and not having the retention that we would like. That's just my thinking about what you said there, Alison.
Yeah, and I think that the latest local government settlement, well, great news for local government, has just widened the disparity between commission services and local authority services. And I think, Donald, you're part of the same groups, but there's the Fair Work and Social Care group, which is a national group looking at pay, terms and conditions and effective voice. And the purpose of those groups is to get us to what's now being called an acceptable negotiated starting point. which is great, and there's a lot of work goes into them. But then the unintended consequence of the local government settlement just sets all of that work back to the starting point again. You know, we're further away from equality because of that than we were this time last week.
And by an acceptable, sorry, I was just going to say, by an acceptable negotiated starting point, you mean the starting, so that explicitly means the starting salary for social care staff that feels like it's reasonable and it feels like it's reasonable.
Yeah, so the aim is really to try to eventually bring parity across the entire, unfortunately at the moment it's only the adult social care sector, but to begin to bring parity across adult social care, and particularly around terms and conditions. There's a real gulf between public sector and commission services, and I'm sure, Donald, you'll find exactly the same.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Alison's saying, and around the fair work things, those work streams, what we found there was even more greater inequity in terms of personal assistance, because some of the opportunities or the benefits that were being administered to the rest of the social care workforce, personal assistants were excluded from that because of the lack of registration. We've taken steps to rectify that. We've set up a wellbeing subgroup as part of the PA programme board. But I suppose I mentioned that whole system approach earlier. I was looking at the Setting the Bar report that Social Work Scotland produced. And that highlighted the conflicting priorities that social workers have. And that's right at the starting point of the process. So that's going to have an impact on social care itself. That indicates the need for the move to a more relationship-based role, which hasn't really happened. Another thing that came out this week was a BBC News article around where it was around personal assistance, where there was one example of an employer who said that a third of her PAs came. It was based in England. A third of her PAs came from Europe, and they were no longer eligible to work in the UK. So that's an added pressure. I suppose if I was to say there's been any positive change in the past couple of years, it's been the appetite to work together across sector and engage online far more equally and responsively than we've been able to before.
Yeah, it does feel like there's some, we are already starting to lean towards the positives, which is great, because we definitely want to take a kind of solutions-focused approach when we're addressing this, because we have to recognise that there is a crisis, but there are things that people are doing that are dead interesting, that are presenting an alternative. And it feels like what we're talking about just now is that there's kind of structural things that can be put in place to make social care more appealing, more equitable, more viable as a career option for people. So things like the fair work for social care, or advocating for inclusion of PAs and recognition and as being part of that workforce, are some dead important kind of structural things that are happening. Is there any other kind of those like big picture national drivers that are interesting to talk about before we go on to talk about some of the, I suppose, individual examples of things being a bit different? Are those the main ones?
Yeah, I think there's just a couple of that are probably of more interest to employers, but the new National Leadership Development Programme, which is leading to change. And I think Donald highlighted the lack of training and development for the PA workforce, and this is similar with adults and children's workforce. And so Scottish Government have funded, I think it's initially a 3-year programme, and it's leadership at all levels. Mm-hmm. And initially the programme was opened only to adult social care. However, after a bit of a challenge on that, it's now open to adult and children's services, workers in adult and children's services. And I think that will have a huge impact on if we can get the leadership qualities and skills right, then I think that will begin to have some sort of impact throughout the workforce. Mm-hmm. And also if we can begin to introduce leadership for all from, your first support worker role, then you begin to encourage career development and career pathways, career progression in the sector. Ideally, you would like it to be within your organisation, but if we can keep people in the sector, I think that would be hugely beneficial. And the other one I'll just mention briefly is the Safer Recruitment Guidance, which is to support recruitment into social care. And the guidance has been around for quite some time. It's really well used, but it was quite clunky in parts. Is that an official word? Don't know if the Care Inspectorate would consider it clunky. It was quite clunky in parts, and actually some of it was more of a hindrance than a help. And we have been working really closely with SSC and the Care Inspectorate to refresh this guidance so that the challenge of getting people in to apply for roles in the sector will still be there, but actually for those who do apply, the process should be a lot simpler and more streamlined and hopefully shorter. So we don't lose people from application to actually beginning the job, which is what often happens at the moment. So there are two positives.
Yeah, they're both really interesting, aren't they?
I think the other one I would say is the development of the national induction framework as well.
Do you want to say a wee bit about what that is, Donald?
SSC have developed the national induction framework, but we have been able to, the training group from the PA programme board did a look at it, and not all of it was more formal, registered workforce focused, but we have managed to have an input on that as well, and on a continuing basis. So trying to develop that so that PA employers can use it as well.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's of interest.
I'm just what our discussion so far makes me think, and it's not this isn't any rocket science or anything, is that obviously there's no one simple answer, and there will need to be a range of different answers that help this crisis. And I'm also just thinking about that idea of a crisis, because in a crisis what you need to do is whatever you do something to make things stop getting worse, and then you've got to develop those other things, maybe those structural things that we talked about that are longer term, and have ways that you can take small steps to resolving it. But first of all, you've got to stop making things worse, basically stop doing things that make things worse. I'm just going to put a couple of comments up as well. Julia just really acknowledging the difference in some of the associated benefits compared to when we compare to some of the statutory rates and so forth. And then June's putting up some links here, and then another resource there, which is probably the resource that you were it's the induction resource that you were mentioning there, wasn't it, Donald? Yeah.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah,
thanks for that. So these are you're right, so some of these ways of plugging the holes in the bucket, or at least making sure they don't get any bigger, there's some there's another wee comment popped up as well about an emergency PA register, and maybe that's a question for you, Donald, before we move on to the bigger question. Do you know that there's an emergency PA register with Spain and PA network? Would this be reviewed? Have you heard anything about that?
I haven't, no. One of the things that we have been working on with government and the programme board is trying to establish banks of PAs for that purpose, so that we do have people on an emergency basis. We're at the start of that. And as I said, there's the whole approach that we're taking. One of the initial focuses has been on recruitment. So we'd set up a My Job Scotland page for PA recruitment. But we're having all those things that Alison mentioned around the stress, the workforce, the inequity we're having to address. But so we've got video case studies, because a lot of people don't understand what the role itself is of a personal assistant. So we're using different media there's a whole promotional campaign as well, and we're using the data from that site to inform us about existing PA vacancies, more granular detail about different types of roles, how many organisations are using the site. We've got quite a lot using it already. Setting up banks of PAs for relief, and we looked at regional banks as well, because with the kind of geographical setup, it makes no sense for somebody to travel from one end of the Highlands to another when they can access somebody across the border in Perth or so on. So we're also looking at workforce planning in general, and we have to work out what the future need is for PAs. There's an action within the National Workforce Strategy to project that future need. But we've also got work streams and training. I think sitting underneath this as well is a careful communication that doesn't undermine the relationship between the PA and the employer, undermine the agency of the employer. There's a real nervousness around registration, which was, there in the review, not the review, the questionnaire that came out post-review. We've got an impact campaign around with the video case studies. And we've got the Wellbeing group based on the Fair Work stream that Alison mentioned. And trying to set up peer support groups as well with the PA network, and looking at banks of PAs there as well. So
that idea of, because I know we speak to lots of providers every day, and there is a real issue, and as well, Alison, we spoke about this, about how quite often going in to fill that 45% gap in the rota, folk are having to use agency and pay really high costs to be able to get staff in, because it's critical. They've got a duty to make sure that their staff on board, and they'll get them any way they can. So that idea of an emergency bank of PAs, which is almost like an agency type approach, but it's not going to be for profit. It'll be a kind of pool of people. That's a dead interesting idea. I hadn't heard about that. So that's a potential interesting solution, because we spoke about this when we spoke, didn't we, Alison, about the kind of false economy of having agency staff in, and it becoming a bit of a vicious kind of pattern or a cycle of having to get folk in to cover shifts. So maybe that's interesting.
I think that, not just talking about PAs here, but I think that in general, the recruitment processes that we have across the board are so risk-based that I don't know what you've felt, Alison, but we've certainly, even recruiting for staff within our organisation, have to change the goalposts a lot and loosen some of those restrictions. Accepting CVs where you've got this rigid online format that people want to use, because you're not in that position of such wealth of choice anymore.
And I think the updated safer recruitment guidance does reflect some of that. But just, some of CCPS members have invested in recruitment and retention. So it's their HR department, but their remit is solely on recruitment and retention. And what they've done is to take away some of that aversion to risk throughout the recruitment processes, to try and improve the number of people coming into their organisation. And they're actually finding that when you do put a bit of a focus into it, and to make confident and sensible decisions, but perhaps not as risk-based as the safer recruitment guidance would like you to, that actually you can manage that process differently. And they're just one of the organisations that's doing this is just at the start of it, but even 2 months into their focus on this, they're beginning to see a bit of a difference. I mean, what that means obviously is that for those organisations that have got the resource to do that, then they'll benefit in this really tight labour market. But there's possibly some lessons that can be learned from them changing their recruitment processes that we could use throughout the sector to give us a bit of an edge in the wider labour market.
It's interesting, because it's interesting you mentioned that idea of leadership at all levels, which is obviously a really good a good way of describing things, I think, Alison. But it also just makes me think about the fact that as you say, that whole retention issue is an issue that's been around for. I mean, we're talking about the crisis now, but the retention issue and the use of agency staff an issue that's never been out of the social care workforce in the sector. And it's the thing is, how do we learn from the best practice that does work in order to help people feel like they want to stay in the jobs that they're doing? And I can't get away from that idea that one of the ways that we can do that is that we also need to invest in the management of those staff, so that they do feel valued, as well as all the other things, as well as obviously raising the profile, raising the status, which are also necessary things that will be part of this big picture of a solution that isn't one that has many strands to it, because if it was simple, it would have been sorted a long time ago. There's also a very specific question here just about which might take us into a slightly different area of discussion. Pooling budgets, has this been explored as a
so this, to give a bit of a summary of what Julia means by this, we in Control Scotland have been looking into this for quite a long time to try and promote it as an alternative for, say you've got two folk who have a similar set of needs that might be able to share their budgets together to do specific bits of their support, and share the support staff, so pool their budgets together to make a purchase or buy a service or get some support, whatever that might be. And it's something that for those of us who've been around SDS since the early days, was one of the big attractions. It was one of the big exciting things that got promoted, and we were all quite excited about this. And it hasn't maybe taken off quite as well as we would have hoped, I think, for lots of reasons. But it'd be great to I've definitely got one or two examples. So it'd be great to hear if anybody, Alison or Donald, have got anything they want to share on where people have come together to pool budgets. If not,
it's really relatively little, Pauline. It's, you hear the odd thing. I can give you examples. I heard, I had a group of parents in one rural area who managed to pool budgets because people weren't able to get to their day services. This was in relation to autism. The need for consistency was vital. So they managed to pool their budgets to get a minibus and a driver to do that. Now, that kind of thing should be more straightforward than run-of-the-mill. But it's not.
Yeah, you're right. When I've had conversations about it, people, I think, and it comes back to that idea of risk and perceptions of risk. Like, people get a wee bit tied in the knots about who will be ultimately responsible for this. If there's two people coming together, does one of them have to do something that the other one doesn't to make sure they all get tied in together and all the rest of it? And I think sometimes folk get a bit just tied up in process and bureaucracy and risk.
It can be fear-driven because people are worried about having budgets cut, and if they worry about pooling budgets and making efficiencies that way and losing impact, and with it being more budget focused than outcome focused.
Aye, but the evidence doesn't support that at all. There's no the evidence is that actually it can be a really excellent way of people coming together to be able to get more bang for their collective buck, I suppose. One thing that we're doing a bit of work in East Ayrshire through a Sheffield University project called Impact Networks, and that's one of the things in particular we're looking at is how to open the door into pooling budgets, because the experiences that we've heard from other people are incredibly positive. Whether it's so that folk can go on holiday, going on holiday when you've got a big support package can be really, really tough to be able to save up hours to be able to do it, but actually. If you've got a pal and you can go on holiday together and share your support, then that can be a really good option. And the other bit that we're looking at is for people who are living in a supported living environment. So there's maybe 2 or 3 people that are all living in the same house and they've all got support needs. Then how can they pool their budgets together instead of it being totally artificially separated from in the way that it might be in the past, I suppose. So, a really interesting alternative, and I would love to explore that more with folk. If anybody wants to have a chat, please drop us a line. We're always on the prowl. Alison, sorry.
Yeah,
Alison,
interesting. It's interesting, isn't it? And those two things that you said, more bang for your buck, or that idea of effective and efficient, is a really important thing to keep mind of. If you go even further back, the reason that people pooled budgets was because they were trying to save money and trying to develop congregate services as well. So it's the balance. You've got a balance there, haven't you? So like we say, it's really good to be flexible around that, but also we need to be aware that people should be making those choices if they want to do that, rather than feeling forced down that avenue. So it can work really well, and we have to have those safeguards around it. And then that's when we get into that bit, Donald, isn't it? About, well, what are the right level of safeguards, and what are the right level that still put people at the center of their support, and put people having the choice, control, and flexibility that they should have. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, interesting. So what other examples can we think about of when either people, organizations, or groups of people, whoever that might be, have come together or done something just a wee bit different? Alison, have you got any? You talked a wee bit about how one of your providers, members of CCPS, has looked at retention and recruitment a wee bit more creatively. Have you got any other examples of when folk have done something a bit different?
Yeah, I'm just about to plug CCPS here. So, Keith, you talked about that we need to support people, the workforce, when we've got them, if we want to improve retention. But actually, there's probably for us a step before that, and we need to get the right people in the first place into the workforce. And what our members were finding was that DWP referrals were not always the most appropriate referrals. So DWP offered to work with the social care sector to try and improve the people that they were referring into social care, and to try and make sure that it was people who knew what they were coming into and wanted to come into it, or thought they wanted to come into it and had a better chance of staying. And so we worked with our members, and what we done was we recorded a series of podcasts, and we also, if I can just share my screen, it was accompanied by a fact sheet. And the fact sheet, let's go into window.
I would offer help, but I've never shared the screen on this either, so.
Neither have I, so let me just see if I can do this. I don't want to share my inbox. It was accompanied by a fact sheet, and we sent it to DWP, and it was put onto their intranet for all of their job coaches. And we also shared it with Skills Development Scotland careers advisors, and I'm not going to be able to share this.
That's okay. Is it up on your website, and we can maybe pop a wee link in afterwards? June can go and have a...
It's not, but what I'll do, Pauline, I'll send it to you.
Brilliant, thank you.
And this was just to try and make it clear what social care is. It started off as our myth busting podcasts. So to dispel the myths about social care, about it being a dead-end job, a low-paid job, it's only for women, and it's all about personal care. You've got to be able to drive. So it was all about that. Let me just stop sharing because my screen's going mad. And that was really successful. And one of my colleagues at CCPS is just at the moment reviewing all of that. So she's working with DWP and our members to understand the impact that that's had, and whether it has actually reduced the number of inappropriate referrals into social care.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, that's interesting. And I think a lot of organisations as well are moving away from kind of competency-based recruitment to values-based recruitment, and really getting under the hood, under the bonnet of what makes a person tick, and actually ultimately what's the people who hadn't really considered social care as a viable career would be perfect for it, and because based on their values rather than their experience. So that's great. Sorry, Keith.
One of the things I meant to mention earlier on is we've developed just to make it easier for people considering taking on a role as setting themselves up as a personal assistant. We already had an online PA Employers Handbook resource, and so developed an equivalent personal assistant handbook, which was launched recently, which is really extensive and thorough, and people can get loads of information there about the role. I'll put it in the chat if that's... Does that go to everybody?
No, that's great. We'll definitely share that as well. It's a great resource. And there's as well, when we're thinking about myth busting, put my teeth in, there's also, I think, still a lot of myths and misconceptions. Why did I choose those words to say? Around about being a PA as well, about whether you need to be self-employed, about what your liabilities are for tax and PVG and all those kind of things as well. And the PA handbook gives an awful lot of advice and information on all of that, doesn't it? It's a great resource.
It does. We've never really got to the to the bottom of the self-employed issue yet. We've managed to the review of the STS statutory guidance. There's been a bit of a loosening of approach there, so there's not a blanket ban on local authorities allowing people to undertake to contract with self-employed PAs, but there's still an issue around HMRC. So we're plugging away at that one.
Yeah. I mean, that's been around again. That's been around so long, hasn't it, Donald? It's just it's one of those things that you think, well, let's sort that, because that's one of those things that I think about when we think, well, let's not do things that make things worse. Let's do things that we know can make things a wee bit better at the moment.
And it's great that we've seen that kind of loosening in terms of the perception of risk at Scottish Government level. But of course, MRC, no jurisdiction there, so.
I was gonna ask a question around about that, because when COVID, when the additional SDS guidance was issued during the pandemic, it did loosen some of the restrictions around about who you can employ and how you can use budgets for
family members.
So for folk who might not be aware, when the pandemic guidance was issued, it said that for some people, employing a family member may be the only or best option, depending on the situation. And actually, that can be a good outcome for some people who've got really maybe particularly complicated communication needs or support needs, or really rural or isolated. Have you got any examples of people doing that successfully, Donald? What about?
There's been a lot more of that, and as long as it's well managed, the risks have been relatively minimal. There's always concerns around if people have power of attorney, or if there's guardians or anything like that. But other than that, no, there's been a big increase in family members being able to act as PAs, and it's kept that consistency. We've seen it with a lot of autistic people that have needed that ongoing consistency. So that's been really useful.
Definitely. So I had one or two other things I'd definitely like to ask or talk about very briefly, because this has been a good chat so far. But I think when we're be interesting to think about when the way that services are commissioned is really important within this as well, because if commissioners are setting out long contracts for people with no potential uplifts or changes or limitations of how providers on frameworks or who've been commissioned can kind of flex and move, then that can really limit the opportunity to do things differently as well. Alison, not to put you on the spot, but I know CCPS have done loads of work around about commissioning and procurement. Is there anything in particular you think that's interesting, or that we should think about exploring in our Thursday session around about how commissioners, because I know commissioners watch this webinar as well, so what we can do differently to affect change at that level too?
You really have put me on the spot, Pauline, but let me give you my answer. So my colleague Catherine Garrett leads on our commissioning and procurement programme, and they've done a whole series of sessions where they're working with providers, employers and commissioners, and there's some really good resources that have come out of that. So again, what I'll do is get a copy of those, or the links to where they are on our website, and I can share them with you afterwards.
Wonderful, thank you. Because one of the things that we found when we were doing our option 2 research, because it's my two favourite things to talk about, are option 2 and commission and procurement, and the idea that I suppose what SDS should be able to offer is not just purchasing services from a framework that's predetermined by a procurement exercise, that actually using self-directed support, no matter what option you use, technically you should be able to access stuff that's ordinary community activities, or accessing all those things like gym memberships and horse riding and all these kind of local ordinary opportunities that people have that aren't procured in the same way as lots of social care is. So there's examples, I suppose, that we could share about when people have shifted their mindset away from the usual care and support being provided by a care and support organisation and thinking about using their time differently and having using supports that are in their community to achieve this. And when it's outcomes focused instead of needs led, that's when these conversations become possible, and actually moving to these other types of supports or opportunities could potentially free up some care hours from staff elsewhere and let people use budgets more effectively. I'll give one wee example on this before I stop talking. Is working with a woman who's the local authority policy is that all moving and handling is 2-to-1, but this woman, when she was receiving support from a provider, it was always 1-to-1. So there's a clear blockage, like a backlog of hours and time that's being used that could be used more effectively if we think about things from a policy commissioning level, like just not and taking things individually. So rather than it being blanket rule that everybody any moving and handling has to have 2 people doing that support, actually on a case-by-case basis, we could be thinking more, we could be thinking differently and using the resources that we've got more effectively. And then even the level beyond that, so does a support worker have to do this job, or is this something that I could have natural supports or support for a community activity to help me to achieve it? Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now, but these are very live and pressing issues that we're working with at the moment.
And I think just critical to all of that, planning around commissioning procurements, the involvement of people with lived experience. And when we do have that more individual relationship type focus, it works. And so if ethical commission is going to work, we have to involve people on a more ongoing basis.
Yeah, true.
So is this somebody agreeing with you in relation to the comments that you're making there, Pauline, really? So Julie's agreeing with you in relation to that flexibility around how
Aye.
Yeah.
Dead frustrating when we had a case of somebody who in one of the Ayrshires, I won't name which one, who their support completely changed during the pandemic, as everybody's did, but they had previously been going to a day centre for quite a lot of their week. And when the day centres closed, they found other things to do, so there wasn't that need to go back to the way things were before, because they had been more creative. They had thought of other things like in the community that were less about going to a day centre every day and using the bus, the council bus to get there, and the support that was available when they were there as well. So all of these ideas free up other resource for people who might for whom that might be the right option or the thing that they want to do.
We're at 11:53 now, Pauline, so we probably need to we probably need to make our final comments for today's webinar for our live stream. But we're also going to come back and talk about this again on Tuesday, aren't we, in a different format. So on Tuesday, our lunchtime session, we've got an hour to talk about it using Microsoft Teams, haven't we?
So we'll get a chance to hear from a bit more, not just me on my soapbox, but a few other folks' ideas and opinions on it as well. So thanks for the time check, Keith. Any closing remarks from yourself, Donald or Alison, that you want to share before we hopefully let's end on a positive if we can? Well,
Pauline, I was thinking it's tangential really, but we've got an opportunity. We're all involved in this, the new SDS national collaboration that's been established. We've been given the go-ahead to develop a new SDS implementation plan because we've not had a strategic driver for some time. We've got a focus on the National Care Service. So we've all got an opportunity to develop a new piece of policy, of practical policy, an implementation plan that gets us from A to B but influences B. So I think we need to address the recruitment situation, the retention within that. And we've got the chance to do that now.
Yeah, thanks, Donald. Alison, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think Donald did mention that they're looking to set up a peer support group, and I think that, Keith also talked about we need to support the people that are in the workforce. We also need to support our managers, our HR workforce, you know, who are dealing with all of these crises as well as on top of their own work. And at CCPS, we have a fortnightly meeting. It's unimaginatively titled Workforce Issues, and it's peer support, updates and peer support. But what that's led on to is some practice sharing sessions. So where we have a detailed look, and the one that's coming up next week is around induction. And so we bring along a couple of members that are doing induction really well, and they share that with the rest of our membership, so that those organisations that think their induction programme needs a bit of a refresh can hear from people who are doing really well. So I think this idea of peer support and practice sharing is really key to a lot of this until we find a way out of the situation. But the other thing it's really great for is for gathering intelligence. And I think we should never forget the importance of lobbying and influencing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's and like Donna said right at the beginning, there is a real change in appetite for people to want to collaborate and work together on these challenges, because nobody's cracked it, but we could possibly crack it together. Work and share our knowledge. So thank you very much. Anything else for you, Keith?
No, just reminding people that we are going to continue this conversation next Tuesday lunchtime. It's 12 o'clock. And June has said thank you to everybody there for today, and reminds that the next live stream is going to be on Wednesday, the 5th of October. So the next live stream through StreamYard onto Facebook and YouTube is 5th of October. But there's also the opportunity next Tuesday, which would be the what would that be? That would be the would it be the 13th? Would it be the 13th, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you so much to both Alison and Donald for joining us today, and I'm really looking forward to continuing this conversation next week and beyond, because we're not going to. There's a lot more chatting to do.
Yeah.
So,
okay, thanks very much. It's been lovely to join you this morning.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
See you all next.